G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic week. I know we're on the countdown of the last videos before I take a break, but I just want to thank you guys all for the support and being here. Now today, as always, of course, what do we have? We have a lot to go over. So look, I'm going to show you some interesting bits of footage that I've seen come out overnight and some equipment as well. We need to talk about what Zelensky has said about North Korean soldiers potentially entering the battlefield, and then we'll look at the relationship between North Korea and Russia, as we know that has been growing. Of course, then, we need to talk about nuclear weapons. We're going to look at what the US has said, at what Biden has said, and then I'm going to look at some nuclear, somewhat doctrine, I guess, or how nuclear weapons are used. Because nuclear weapons are used every single day. Yeah, they're not exploding, but are they used in a way to cement a state's power around the world? Absolutely, every single day they are. So we're going to talk about that. We need to talk about these European Union loans of seized Russian assets, and of course we'll be then looking at the maps. Now, where do we want to start? Let's start at some of the interesting things I've seen overnight. So Ukraine's military intelligence, the GUR, has then put this up with the video. I don't have the video here, sorry, I'll overlay it on here. I mustn't have uploaded it. A devastating fire broke out at the Russian military airfield, the Orenburg 2, where the Tu-134 was stationed. Such Soviet-era aircraft are used, among other things, to transport senior officials of Russia's Ministry of Defense. Defense intelligence of Ukraine reminds that every crime against Ukrainian people will receive due retribution. So this is a Tu-134 aircraft here. And you can see in the video that I'll overlay here, it burning, you can see that front, which is very easy to spot of what sort of aircraft it is. I have put here, though, these were fully withdrawn from commercial service in 2019, following an incident, I believe, in 2011 that killed around 40 people. There is private sale of these to some like Russian oligarchs, aristocrats. I'm unsure how much they are used still for military use, but that aircraft has burnt, said to be by, well, we're guessing by either foreign agents working or then, what's the word I'm looking for? Partisans working as well. We may see more and more of that partisan action. I actually believe we would have seen a lot more of that action given Ukraine and Russia's history and recent history. I thought we would have seen way more partisan actions on both sides of the fence throughout this war. Now, there has been a video going around going through all the Russian telegrams of the Russian special forces working behind the line and some drone bits and pieces, but I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in some of the equipment we see used in this footage. Now, these special forces guys here, who are in like your ghillie suit, tree suit, whatever you want to call it, then like adjacent to this road, they're using this iPad looking thing, but this is connected to a trail cam, and they're using like this video link trail cam of what this screen is showing the soldiers to then lay and then set their ambush, so they can be in full cover. They see when you can see it's hard to see, but these are Ukrainian forces moving down this trail here and then are engaged in that ambush. So interesting to see some of that technology entering then setting ambushes and that being used in that footage too. So let's then have a talk about North Korea. Now, one thing I just want to say in the beginning is there's no evidence yet that North Korean soldiers are in Russia and or have entered the battlefield, although I'm not surprised at all by this news. Now, months ago, everyone took the piss out of this, and I said, no, this is a big deal. It doesn't matter on the level of training per se, just extra soldiers in the battlefield at this point for Russia can make a huge difference. Now, what I said there is it doesn't matter about the level of training. Now, you're going, well, you say this all the time. I say, well, sorry, you say the opposite of this. I say the opposite of that when it comes to particularly offensive actions, particularly actually keeping guys alive on the battlefield, and ability to conduct defensive actions too. But of course, defensive is a lot easier than offensive. But what I could see some of these low-level trained guys doing is more things like what we presume low-level trained. We don't really know the level of training, but sitting on garrison somewhere. Russia has a massive border. That is a blessing and a curse. The curse of that is we need to man this whole bloody border. You could then have these soldiers sitting somewhere like that, and that may free up Russian troops to then enter the battlefield. As well as, we spoke about at the time, what was being rumoured was that North Korean engineers were entering the battlefield. And I said, well, engineers, what combat engineers do is they build things like bridges, they demine things, and they dig trenches. And that just extra hands makes a huge, huge difference. And as well, the ability to gain experience. I said, I know everyone's taking the piss out of this because everyone watches the cringy North Korean Navy SEAL videos of this and that and karate chopping things. But at the end of the day, one of the big parts of this war is just extra hands, extra manpower. So let's have a look at what Zelensky has said and then what some Russian media has said here as well. Now, I have said here that Zelensky needs some tips off old WillioAM YouTube channel thumbnails. But he has said, and this was the first one released on the 13th, and we'll look at his most recent one. And we need to act right now to prevent Russia and its accomplices from adapting to our capabilities. We see an increasing alliance between Russia and regimes like North Korea. This is no longer just about transferring weapons. It's actually about transferring people from North Korea to the occupying military forces. Obviously, in such circumstances, our relations with partners need to develop further. The front line needs more support. So speaking not only weapons, but these guys are coming in on the ground. Now, this one is the most recent one. He says the Kursk operation and our vision of further actions on the foothold. So further actions out from Kursk. We're going to look at Kursk right after this. We'll look at where that map has been moving. But Foreign Intelligence Service and the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine on the intentions of Russians for the fall and winter, everything was quite detailed. The actual involvement of North Korea in the war, also Russians' relations with other countries that unfortunately are investing in prolonging the war. So the other ones here we're speaking of will be China or Iran, or I should say, and or Iran. So where's this all then come from? Well, one, to get extra support, but secondly, from this strategic partnership. We see this come out today on the 15th. This treaty was signed back in June in Pyongyang, of course, the capital of North Korea, the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea. I'm not sure if that's very truthful. I feel like if you have to have democratic in your name, questionable. But Putin submitted a treaty on comprehensive strategic partnership between Russia and North Korea. Now, I've highlighted here the sides seek to establish goals, strategic ability, and a fair multipolar international system, according to the memo into the treaty. So this is something we hear Putin and or other Russian officials talk about all the time, is this multipolar world. Moving from, we had a bipolar world where you had the Soviet Union, communism, and you had capitalism in the West up until 91. We saw the collapse of that. Since then, we have seen then a unipolar world with the US at the helm, but the West as part of that, and broke into, some will say, the West and the rest. And what Putin and many other officials are speaking at is the evolvement into a multipolar world. Now, I've spoken a bit on this down the line, before. I'm going to speak more on it and how I believe Russia, where they see this happening. I might speak on it more in a video actually tomorrow. I've done a fair bit of research into what do they actually mean by this as different civilizations, maybe not as separate states, and where they see where they are going to gain power and where the West will lose power. But further, the treaty states that in the event of an imminent threat of an act of an armed aggression against one of the sides shall, at the request of the sides, immediately activate bilateral channels for consultations with a view to coordinating their positions and agreeing on possible practical measures to assist each other to help eliminate the threat. In the event that one of the sides comes under armed attack by any country or several countries, thus finds itself in a state of war, the other side will immediately provide military and other assistance by all means at the disposal in accordance with Article 51, blah, 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 blah. But this is an interesting part here. I wonder if we'll see these North Korean soldiers used in occupied parts of Ukraine, or if we'll see these North Korean soldiers used to then try and push back that Kursk offensive. Because in this lines up of if there's an attack against this, blah, 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 actually could we see that used there? That would be very interesting. Maybe this is part of it. The sides shall not allow the use of their territory by third countries to violate the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of the other side. So again, maybe we'll see that used there. But again, if you live in glass houses, maybe don't throw some stones. But we are seeing definitely strategic partnerships getting built between Russia and other nations. And a lot of this has been sped up from different messaging around the world, different conflicts around the world, one of which I will say, of course, what's happening in Israel and then the states around it does speed up that dramatically. And I want to speak on that in a second. I just have the thing in the wrong folder. But what do I think of this? So, look, I don't know if we'll see troops straight away. I don't know. I think maybe likely Kursk. I don't know about in other areas. Right now, it doesn't seem that Russia's screaming for the need of way more men at the expense of what this may bring. But absolutely, I would not be surprised if there's officers, like North Korean officers, in like headquarters command in Moscow or wherever to gain experience. And I would have zero surprises if there were Chinese officers sitting in headquarters in Moscow as well to gain experience on large-scale, protracted, attritional warfare. Because down the line, war like this is very likely to happen. And this is, to a degree, exactly what we're doing too. We are watching this as a bit of a test run for what would a protracted war look like in a fight with China, and China's doing the same for what would a protracted attritional war look like with the West. Remember that the wars won't have decisive beginning and end point in the bloody same week. This is the principle called the day after principle, I believe, where it goes, okay, if there's a major war breakout, like China, the West, China, US, that you'll have, yes, those initial days, but those initial days are unlikely to be decisive, but it may take down a lot of equipment. The ultimate victor of that war is going to depend on the day after. Who can mobilise those assets, who can bring assets into the fight again, and who can absorb, recover, and launch offensive or defensive actions. It's the day after, and we've seen a bit of that day after here by both Ukraine and Russia after those initial attacks. This is the period that we are in right now, and I believe this is the period that the West and China are very, very interested in to see what lessons are to be learnt and what they can take away from this for their own training and their own development of equipment. But I think probably the biggest lesson learnt of this war is that quantity has a quality of its own, both in man, machine, and partners. I spoke there of around the world, relationships being strained by war. Now, Ukraine-Russia, that does definitely put strains on relationships, but I think the war at the moment, the conflict at the moment that's really straining relationships is Israel into Lebanon, into Gaza, Houthis, Iran, this whole situation. Mikhail Podolyak, a Ukrainian presidential advisor, we spoke about a lot, said, this is speaking of the victory plan, that it needs necessary diplomatic, military, economic, political steps to compel Russia to end the war. There's a request for more long-range weapons, ATACMS, Storm Shadow, but the US has declined permission for these long-range strikes so far. Without more support, Podolyak said the war could drag on for years and end up eroding Western nations' global standing. Forcing Ukraine to negotiate from a position of weakness wouldn't end the conflict, but would embolden Putin to press on with his main goal of total control over Ukraine. The first I push back on this is total control over Ukraine. One, I don't know if is possible given the resources Russia has available because of the amount of uprisings within. But secondly, is never been a stated goal either. There's propagandists on the TV may say it, there's propagandists maybe on YouTube will say it, or maybe on Telegram. But as far as from an official point, we've never actually, personally, I've never actually seen that said. But when we talk about Western nations' global standing being eroded, I believe the biggest conflict eroding that standing is Israel and the H-men for the global South and sort of everyone other than the West, of how they look upon that, even within the West, of how people see that incredibly decisive war. And things that have eroded this is things like UN calls for de-escalation of ceasefires that have been either vetoed or not seen to, ICC warrants that have been shoved aside and there's said that there's no jurisdiction, and many nations, a lot of nations, calling out the hypocrisy in this war compared to other areas, everything from actions taken, strikes signed off, as well as like those warrants. And I believe that has had a huge change in the global standing and actually helped the strategic hybrid warfare campaign that Russia's trying to push out into the world more than anything else. And that just talks on those relationships that can be strained around the world also. But with North Korea coming in, more hands on deck as for building fortifications, sitting in trenches or sitting in areas so other troops can be mobilised, put into the fold into the fight, I don't see this as a bad thing for Russia's overall war aims. Like we said, quantity has a quality of its own. Now, let's talk about nuclear weapons and what has come out, and then I promise I will show you the maps. So this came out from the White House, statement from President Biden congratulating Nobel Peace Prize winners. Nobel Peace Prize winners embody determination and resilience in the face of tragedy. For decades, members of the Nihon Hidankyo have served as a human testament to the catastrophic human toll of nuclear weapons and took the historic work to ensure that nuclear weapons are never used again. I was powerfully reminded last year when I visited Hiroshima and met with the survivor of the bombing. We must continue making progress towards the day when we can finally and forever rid the world of nuclear weapons. Good luck. The United States stands ready to engage in talks with Russia, China and North Korea without preconditions to reduce the nuclear threat. There is no benefit to our nations or the world to forestall progress on reducing nuclear arsenals. Now, in this statement in here that we're ready to engage in talks with these countries here without preconditions has sent, of course, Twitter into a flat spin overnight. Now, I said nuclear weapons are used every day, but how are these nuclear weapons used? So, of course, we can speak about this a long way, but nuclear weapons can be used absolutely as a tool of coercion. The speculation that Russia uses its nuclear arsenal not just as a deterrent, but as political coercion. This involves the threat of nuclear escalation to influence and strategic calculations of other countries. And of course, Russia may do this more publicly, but any nuclear power does this to a degree just by having them. They're not going to use them, but of course they are there for... Where's the line between influence and coercion? Well, you've got an ICBM that can go around the world somewhere. I don't know if there's really a line there, but statements about saber rattling, suggesting Russia could threaten or imply the use of nuclear weapons to achieve geopolitical goals. And we see that Russia's and Putin's rhetoric about nuclear weapons has been this, and increasing about this throughout the war as well. A very interesting part, though, is unofficial, though, is the Russia's strategy to escalate or de-escalate. And the concept is that a limited nuclear strike early in a conflict to force an adversary to back down to accept ceasefire on favourable terms. This could involve use of a tactical nuclear weapon to demonstrate, resolve and escalate the conflict to a level where the opponent would choose to de-escalate rather than a full-scale nuclear war. And this is what Professor John Mearsheimer believes, that if Russia was to use a nuclear weapon system in Ukraine somewhere, that we would de-escalate that conflict and look for another way out rather than risk a full-scale nuclear war around the world, what would kill in the tens or hundreds of millions in the first coming days. And we know, I don't care what Mr. Bro said on Twitter about Russia would be decimated in a day. I don't care what he said there. What that ignored was, but it goes the other way as well. That's why we have the mutually assured destruction. Now let's look at my thoughts overall, what Biden said and this. That I actually believe the opposite. You need nuclear control, but not eradication. Nuclear disarmament is idealist and not close to the reality of states. If you truly believed in nuclear disarmament, get rid of yours and then ask them to get rid of theirs. No one is going to do that. No nuclear power is going to give up their nuclear weapons. Russia without nuclear weapons is not a superpower. It is, as far as maybe territory, yes, but as far as military superpower, absolutely not. So they're not going to give them up. And China is trying to get to 1,000 deliverable warheads by the end of this decade. You could argue the ultimate sovereignty of a state is the ability to set wheels in motion for an extinction level event. So you could argue that having a nuclear weaponized state is the ultimate in sovereignty, because no one is going to be prepared to invade or bomb your state, due to that you can then have an extinction level event coming from this. But of course, this can lead to humanitarian disasters and dictators hiding behind a nuclear force field, because then no one is prepared to go and do it. I've seen people talk about, what was that South Korean show Squid Game? Of could this happen somewhere in the world? And the answer is no, because it breaks just internationally binding humanitarian laws. But if a country like North Korea did it, that is, a somewhat nuclear power, no one's going to invade over that because of what they can do. And this is where that force field of nuclear weapons can breed disaster and dictatorship behind this too. So that is a real problem of it, but then no one can move. I would be a proponent of Australia having nuclear weapons. If Australia was a nuclear armed state, I believe the threat of down the line somewhere, if there was ever invasion, would be greatly limited. Since the advent of the fission bomb, atomic and nuclear bombs, we have not had a great state war since, likely saving tens, hundreds of millions of lives since World War II claimed 70 to 85 million lives. We have not had a war of that scale yet. Have we had great state wars? Yes, via proxy. We have Afghanistan with the Soviets. We have Vietnam with the West. These are wars by proxy, but as far as head-to-head, Soviets v the West, China v the West, NATO v Russia, no, we have not seen that since, nor have we seen anywhere near the casualties that wars like that would have. So it has potentially forever ended conventional great state war. You're correct, though, that a great state unrestricted war is now an extinction level event. So if that does happen now, the brutality of that is so much higher that humankind as we know it would be basically extinct. But this is precisely why this offers a degree of safety. The mutually assured destruction may actually be the best system for flawed but ultimately selfish humans. We are flawed. We are never going to go, we're all singing Kumbaya around the fire and we're hand shandies with leaders everywhere in the world. It's nice. It's idealist. Is that ever going to happen? No. But the selfishness that is intrinsic in humans does mean, well, Putin knows if he does that, himself, his family, his country is gone. Biden knows the same. Xi Jinping knows the same. Macron knows the same. Willie knows the same. So I believe in that selfishness is the protection from this also. You're never going to have a reasonable way to intercept American, British, Indian, Russian or Chinese intercontinental ballistic missiles, some of which are fired from deep under the ocean. But just because of numerical numbers and the speed and the time to intercept, once it's fired, you have minutes to make decisions there. But I believe knowing the extinction of humankind as we know it would result in the use of these weapons. These states have shown for decades they have had this power but have not used it. So for decades, these countries have had this power and have not used it. So the track record is very good. Accepting that each one of these countries is very unlikely to push the button, but even more unlikely to disarm completely, I do believe the current nuclear powers should develop a system in which they are committed to development and of detection and interception of potential rogue actors and missiles. Now, of course, we can't agree on who are the good and who are the bad guys. But what I am saying in this is, okay, we go, yep, these countries listed, these are the ones who we know we're never going to give up ICBM. They're never going to give up nuclear weapons. It's just not going to happen. But we see countries trying to develop them. Right, we just go, yep, line the sand, this is enough. And we develop systems if Iran get a bomb, we shoot that down. We can because of the powers involved and the amount of coverage of the Earth. Like I say, we'll never agree on who the good and bad guys are to develop a system like this, and I would not be surprised if we saw like technology shared between who we see as good and bad or reliable actors as well. So we're probably going to see an increase in these devastating weapons around the world rather than the idealist decrease. So let's have a look at the maps. Of course, here we have Ukraine, the centre, the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Of course, we have Sumy Oblast, Kursk Oblast, and this is where Ukraine has launched its offensive back into Russia. Now, in the beginning, this didn't really make that much sense to us, given the manpower shortages and other problems on the front line, or at least in a maybe tactical sense, maybe strategically it did, given the PR and ability, if there was support of the victory plan and the exchange fund in here. But I've asked the question multiple times on my Telegram chat, if you want to come and join, about like what did you think of the offensive gamble into Kursk? Because I believe this was a big gamble on the payoff. And as you can see, that the too early to tell has absolutely reduced, as well that the people saying that it is an overall net positive and the net negative has increased. So a lot of people believe that it's become net negative overall. It doesn't mean that there weren't successes in it. It doesn't mean the whole thing's a failure, but net positive when we look back at the entire war, we look at what's happening in the south and the east and other areas now. I'll bring him back. When we look at those areas now, that is it a net overall positive or negative? And I do say as well, I still don't really understand it. And I have myself said that it is net negative, but like with everything, I am happy to have my mind shifted. Now let's have a look in here and have a look at what map changes. Now on the deep state map today, there are no changes, but we look at Gloshkovo. This is the second axis that Ukraine pushed up on. Now what I believe is when Ukraine was out near Kononova, now near Snagost, and Russia started pushing back, Ukraine did try and flank them out of here, but couldn't really make it out past Vasiole. But what we see today by Syriac maps is, let's have a look at where this bit of, the easiest way is just look at the shape of the border. See this like shape, like sort of right angle here, that he's saying the Russian army reversed completely the area taken by Ukrainian army during the month of September. So he's saying this has been fully reversed in here. Again, wait and see. Now we'll jump on to his second update in here. Now this is not the easiest to see because it's sort of backwards of what we're very used to seeing. So don't focus on the bottom part at the moment, focus on this one right here. Now the easiest way to do this, because the labeling does suck, is we're going to just look at the tree lines to get an idea of where things are and are not sitting. So see this one that looks like veins? This is just in here. This is the tree line here, I believe, saying that the Russians have taken back this area. But then as well, you can see between here, this like push out to the north of Lyubimovka, he's saying is under Russian control too. This area, right where my cursor is this right here, I believe. But then if we just come down a little bit more, we're looking at the bottom part of this. You can see where Lyubimovka is and down this road. Let's go in. So just along the top of this, that there is more Russian advancement out towards where we see these reservoirs and the top of Lyubimovka. And he says Korenovsky district, Russian army continue to press on Lyubimovka and Tosty, where Ukrainian troops still remain, in addition making advances to Kalininov in the direction of Pokrovsk. So that Ukrainian troops are still in Lyubimovka, but that Russian forces are pushing on these areas. Now, Suja district, this is where we're going to look now, which is just across, of course, to the east of here. So we have Suja, Ulenok, Borki. Now this is a little bit more difficult to see again. I know that wasn't difficult the first time you're saying, but what we're going to be looking for is where he says Cheskaya Konopelka. Now, Cheskaya Konopelka, this is where we saw that BMP v BMP, I believe the friendly fire incident. We're talking right up in here, as well as this front line, just here as well, out from Ulenok. So what we're looking is, this is Ulenok, this is Ulenok. So out through this area of grey zone here, this is where that Syriac is saying that the Russians have then retaken an amount of territory in here. Again, not the easiest to see, but you can see these tree lines. See these tree lines? That's sitting just in here near where this road runs up and turns out to the northwest. So Syriac saying there are some changes in there, though Zelensky says that it is the point for next actions in here, and we will see if there's a greater plan for what's happening in Kursk at the moment. So let's have a look down the maps and see where else is changing. We'll come from the north to the south, from the window to the wall, and we will come down. This is, as the Starmorsky Urazani Prutny front. We can see there is some Russian advancement out of here. I think we mentioned this yesterday. There may have been some pushes just out of here, but not shown on any other maps today. As well, into Zoloteniva, where we've seen advancement over the past few days. We then see there is further Russian advancement out here too. We have seen armoured assaults as well. If we come north of Ugledar, Vodiani is showing that there was, again, Russian advancement in this direction, which we have seen for the last few days as well. This is backed up further by Noel Reports' map, showing just a little bit further, but on the north, but not as far in the south, or he shows still just right to the border of Vuhledar. So basically we can presume that this is filled in between here and here because the deep state, but he's showing just a little bit to the north. But then let's have a look, because we do have a Syriac map in here too, and what he is showing, if you look at Vodiani, and this is just north of Vuhledar, that he's showing this fill in here. So I actually believe these maps today are fairly correct of where we are seeing, but again, we'll get more of an update down the line and see where things are shifting. So let's continue moving up the map. Now, Pokrovsk in here, no changes shown today. Let's keep moving up the map a little bit more, and we just see a little bit of red here in Toretsk, nothing major, showing that Russians have moved down here. There is more footage coming out from the center of Toretsk as well, mainly the use of TM62 mines in like satchels that the Russians are throwing in buildings and exploding. But we come down into New York, Nepelivka, and there is said to be some changes in here. So if we go then the Noel reports map. Now, this isn't the greatest to see, but see what this road turns out to the northeast? This is this road in here. So he's saying basically from this corner here that this area out has come under Russian control, but nowhere near to the amount of west that the deep state is pushing. This is showing. So this is why we use then multiple different maps. Then let's jump on to this map here of the same area, talking about New York. Surak shows a difference in here, but this is where this is significantly different, is we have, you can't even see Nepelivka on this map, that we see is right up near then Leonidivka, Petrivka. So this is Petrivka up here. We see where this turns out, right in here, and there's sort of a dogleg on the road right here. This is that dogleg. Surak is saying, to my eye, the Russians are right up to where my cursor is here and are pushed into these blocks as well. That is what at least his map is showing and claiming. So let's just push up a little bit further. Now this is Chasiv Yar front in here, where we did see some changes yesterday. We saw 3 different changes in here. Again, Surak maps today does show 3 different changes. Of course, out near Horovkia, across into the western side, of the canal, and they push further down this road out from Ivanivske as well, which lines up with basically what we saw yesterday. But what you can see just at the bottom here is how much different to the south this shows than the deep state map. Now, I said to you yesterday, including Ukrainian maps, showing far different around Klishkivka up to the south of Chasiv Yar. And some asked me which maps are saying this. And I thought, well, I'll show you, because this is then Noel reports' map. Now you can see Ivanivsky, you can see this road. Now he doesn't show the update to the west of Ivanivsky, but let's ignore this. But Klishkivka in here, he does show up to the canal and further out through into these tree lines in here. So he's showing Klishkivka has come under control as well. That is the map that I am referring to, of why I believe this area in here does look significantly different to what we are seeing. So let's move up into the sort of northeast, I guess. We look at Nevsky in here, and you can see, now many other maps are claiming it between Makivka and Nevsky has already been sort of cut through in here. That has shortened up, but again, but we don't know. Deep State today does show that that the Russians have had a push in here. Surak does show an advancement in here, but just to the south of where we are looking. So this is Nevsky in the red dot that he's saying out in these paddocks. See this square? This is said square, and you can see the dotted line that the Russians pushed along this tree line and down to the south as well, and advances here on the border of Lugansk and Donetsk. But that is what that is saying. We have one more thing to go over, and we will try and belt feed this through quickly. So you can see from European Parliament that mobilise Russian assets, a repayment of a loan that is insured. So they want to give Ukraine 35 billion euros, about $50 billion of the revenue made off seized Russian assets, and these are to be dispersed until the end of 2025. But it needs to still be approved by the whole parliament. It's 31 in favour, 4 against, but no abstentions. Of course, like they're saying, extraordinary revenues made from this, and this will be the transfer from those frozen assets, as well as possible contributions from the EU. But there are some restrictions on this. There's measures to prevent fraud made available by the end of 24, but we do see the loan is conditional upon Ukraine's continued commitment to uphold effective democratic mechanisms, respect human rights, and further policy conditions to be set out in a memorandum in understanding. So this is interesting in here that there are, of course, restrictions on this, and we will see down the line when there's repayments of these loans from those frozen assets or by the EU. I will say it's some countries who are not really big on these may try and push on some of these restrictions to try and save a buck. Using profits from immobilised Russian assets sends a clear signal that the burden of rebuilding Ukraine must be shouldered by those responsible for its destruction. One thing I'll say, historically, those who have been responsible for the destruction don't always pay back of what has occurred. But Orban has been said to be trying to mess with this a little bit. Of course, Hungary's minister. Of course, a lot of people are saying, well, boot Hungary out and bring then Ukraine in. But the whole point of a democratic system is people can disagree with the premise. This is the point of democracy. You don't have to be happy all the time, and there needs to be due course and votes and differing opinions, even if you don't like it. But he concocted a way to let Trump, if he successfully makes it to the White House for a second term in November, to wiggle out of the $50 billion loan in the US and European Parliament leaders of the G7 offered to Ukraine to back its survival against Russia. Hungary says it won't consent to a change in rule that would allow Washington to play a major role in the loan until after the US election. Personally, I can see why the US doesn't want to sign anything right now until after the election, because there's talks of negotiations, there's talks of other stuff. And what I believe that the US and some other countries are thinking is, if there's a negotiated settlement to the end of the war, and part of that negotiation is the Russians say we want to unfreeze our assets and we want those back, well, the EU and Washington is going to be left holding the bag for 35 billion euros. The loan would, and I'll go over why this is, the loan would be repaid using the windfall of profits generated over 250 billion of Russian assets that were immobilized. The timing is everything. Sanctions renewal time frame is 36 months. So in Washington, the sanctions renew every 36 months. Washington is saying that this is what the EU needs to do, because under the current rules, the EU sanctions come up for renewal every 6 months, which increases the likelihood of a single country unfreezing their assets, which would force national governments to tap into taxpayers' money to repay the loan. So this is being used off the profits made on those frozen assets. But if they become unfrozen, the loan still exists. Who's going to be paying that? Going to be the taxpayers. And I wouldn't be surprised if right around that election time frame, if they're going, well, we don't know what's going to happen with this war right now, we don't want to be stuck holding the bag of $50 billion, especially because Trump has said there won't, potentially maybe not another cent to Ukraine. That's what a lot of Republicans are saying, not Trump. While other leaders is in favour of extending the sanctions rollover period to 36 months as requested by the US, Orban refuses. According to the EU's own rules, 27 member countries need to approve any changes to the sanction rules. So all need to say, yep, we're good to go. It would likely be higher if the US was on board. However, Orban, that's a small price to pay. The upside for him is that he would be buying much needed goodwill from his Republican friend. If Brussels and Washington jointly underwrite the $35 billion loan, a re-elected Trump would be tied to servicing it for years. But the loan is approved without the US, he would have no such obligation. And I believe that Trump doesn't want this to go through because of his overall messaging about ending the war. War ends, then assets, say part of that negotiation will be unfreezing of assets and however it works, whether that is a swap back for territory or this or that, but that loan is still going to then exist. It will go from the frozen assets repaying it to taxpayer in the US or in EU paying it. And this is the tricky amount of politics that comes when you have then the member states of the EU, the superpower of the US, with an election coming in a couple of weeks. If Hungary refuses to budge in the sanctions duration, the EU is likely to finalise a loan on its own terms because its budget rules make it easier to get the payment approved by national capitals before the year ends. So it can still go through. The EU is fast-tracking legislation to pay up to $35 billion to Ukraine, which covers the US share of the loan and is set to be finalised by the end of October. So it can go through without the US, but of course there are problems in this. Penny-pinching governments in the EU are reluctant to increase their contribution to cover the shortfall of the US, which I believe is $5 billion. We are putting pressure, but so far Orban is not caving. So far, though, we have seen Orban cave on all these different bits with different pressures put on, from him leaving the room so the Germans can get the vote through to different offers and this and that with public support and society support as well. But I believe that's it. Legends, sorry. No, I'm not sorry. I enjoy being here for 40 minutes chatting to you. Have a fantastic day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.